9-year-old Emma sat on her bedroom floor with tears rolling down her face. Her small hands shook as she held the broken pieces of something very special. It was a wooden train set that her grandfather William had made just for her with his own hands before he died last year. This train was not just any toy. It was the most important thing Emma owned in the whole world. Every Sunday afternoon, she and Grandpa William would sit together on the soft carpet in their living room. They would build long winding tracks that went all round the coffee table and under the sofa. Then they would push the little wooden train along the tracks and make up wonderful stories about all the places it would visit. Grandpa William had spent many weeks making this train set perfect for Emma. He had painted each train car by hand using bright red, blue, yellow, and green paint. He had carved tiny little windows into each car that looked so real you might think actual. Tiny people could look out of them. The wheels were perfectly round and smooth. The engine had a little bell that actually rang when you shook it gently. But today everything had gone wrong at school. Emma wore clothes that were old and faded because her father could not afford to buy new ones. Her shoes had holes in them that let the cold air touch her feet. Some of the other children at school were very mean to Emma because of this. They called her terrible names and laughed at her old clothes. They would not let her play games with them at recess time. When Emma came home from school, she felt so sad and angry that her chest hurt. She ran up the stairs to her bedroom as fast as she could. Her tears were already starting to fall from her eyes. She just wanted to get away from everything that made her feel bad. But as Emma rushed into her room, her shoulder bumped hard against her wooden dresser. The dresser shook and wobbled. Emma watched in horror as a precious wooden train set slid across the top of the dresser and crashed down onto the hard floor below. The sound of the wood hitting the floor was terrible. It was like hearing something precious break that could never be the same again. Emma dropped to her knees and saw pieces of her beloved train scattered everywhere. The main engine, which had been painted bright red with yellow stripes, was split right down the middle. You could see the pale wood inside where it had cracked apart. 3 of the train cars had their little round wheels broken completely off. They lay on their sides looking helpless. The beautiful paint that Grandpa William had applied so carefully was now chipped and scratched in many places. Emma felt like her heart was breaking into as many pieces as her train. This toy was her last real connection to her grandfather. When she played with it, she could almost feel like he was still there with her, telling her stories and making her laugh. "Dad, Dad, please help me," Emma cried out in a shaky voice that was full of panic and sadness. Her father James was downstairs in the kitchen making their simple dinner when he heard Emma's desperate call. He dropped everything and ran up the stairs as quickly as his tired legs could carry him. James was still wearing his dirty work clothes from his job at the construction site. His hands and arms were covered with dust and concrete powder. His work boots left small marks on the carpet as he rushed to help his daughter. When James reached Emma's bedroom and saw what had happened, he felt his own heart sink down into his stomach. There was his little girl sitting on the floor surrounded by pieces of broken wood. Her face was red from crying and her whole body was shaking with sadness. "Oh, sweetheart," James said in the gentlest voice he could manage. He got down on his knees right beside Emma on the floor, very carefully. He began picking up the broken pieces of the train set and turning them over in his big rough hands. James had spent his whole adult life working with his hands, but only on big heavy things like concrete blocks and steel beams. His job was building walls for houses and laying sidewalks. He had never tried to fix something so small and delicate as a wooden toy. His fingers, which were thick and covered with hard calluses from years of manual labor, felt clumsy when they touched the tiny broken train pieces. "Can you fix it, Dad?" "Please, can you make it like it was before?" Emma asked in a whisper. Even though she was very upset, there was still a little bit of hope in her voice. She believed that her father could fix anything because he was strong and good at building things. James looked down at all the broken pieces in his hands and felt completely helpless. Money had been very tight for their small family ever since Emma's mother had decided to leave them 2 years ago. James worked long, hard days, but still barely earned enough money to pay for their tiny apartment and buy food for their meals. There was certainly no extra money to take the train to a professional repair shop where someone who knew about fixing wooden toys could help them. "I will try my best, love. I promise I will try," James told Emma, even though deep inside he had no idea at all how he could possibly put something so complicated back together again. The next evening, after James finished his long day of work at the construction site, he did something he had never done before. Instead of going straight home to make dinner for Emma, he stopped his old truck in front of the public library. His heavy work boots made loud sounds on the library floor as he walked inside. James felt a bit nervous because he was not used to being in places with so many books and quiet people. James had never been someone who liked to read very much in school. He had always preferred working with his hands rather than sitting still and reading from books. But tonight was different. Tonight he had a very important mission that required him to learn new things. He walked slowly to the computer section where several old computers sat on wooden tables. James sat down in a plastic chair that was too small for his large frame. With one thick finger, he carefully typed the words "woodworking for beginners" into the search box. He had to look at each key on the keyboard to make sure he was spelling everything correctly. When he pressed the enter button, hundreds and hundreds of web pages appeared on the computer screen. There were so many results that James felt overwhelmed. He squinted his tired eyes at the small black text on the bright white screen, using a stubby yellow pencil that he found in his work shirt pocket. James began writing notes on a crumpled piece of paper. He wrote down important words like wood, glue and sandpaper and clamps. After spending almost an hour reading on the computer, James walked over to the section of the library where they kept books about crafts and building things. He found 3 thick books that had pictures of people fixing wooden objects. The librarian, a kind older woman with gray hair, helped James check out the books using his library card. James hurried home with the heavy books tucked under his arm. Emma was already in her pajamas, getting ready for bed. He helped her brush her teeth and read her short bedtime story, just like he did every night. But tonight, James was thinking about something else while he read. He was thinking about those broken train pieces sitting in a box in their kitchen. After Emma fell asleep in her small bed, James went out to their tiny garage. The garage was really just a small concrete room where they kept old boxes and his work tools. It smelled like motor oil and dust. James turned on the single light bulb that hung from the ceiling. The yellow light was not very bright, but it was enough for him to see what he was doing. James cleared off a space on his old wooden workbench. He found a clean towel in the house and brought it to the garage. Very carefully, he laid out all the broken pieces of Emma's train set on the towel, just like one of the library books had shown him to do. The pieces looked even more damaged, under the harsh garage light than they had in Emma's bedroom. That first night, James just sat on an old stool and stared at the broken train pieces. The wood was cracked and split in ways that looked impossible to fix. Some pieces were so small that James worried his big fingers might break them even more just by touching them. He felt scared and unsure of himself. How could someone who built sidewalks and walls possibly fix something so delicate and detailed? But then James closed his eyes and remembered Emma's face on the day her train had broken. He remembered the way tears had streamed down her cheeks and how her small body had shaken with sadness. He remembered how much joy that little wooden train had brought to her life and how it was her last special connection to her grandfather William. James opened his eyes, took a deep breath, and picked up the first broken piece. Week after week went by, and every single evening James spent time in the cold gulch working on the train. During the day, he would work for 10 long hours at the construction site, lifting heavy materials and working in all kinds of weather. By the time he came home, his back hurt and his arms felt sore. His eyes were tired from squinting in the bright sun all day. But no matter how exhausted James felt, he always forced himself to go out to the gouge and work on Emma's train dot with the few extra dollars he had left from his weekly paycheck. James bought small tubes of wood glue from the hardware store. He already had some sandpaper in his toolbox from his regular work, so he used that to carefully smooth down the rough edges of the broken wood the first few nights. Everything James tried to do seemed to go wrong. Every time he touched a piece, it seemed to break even more. His fingers felt too big and clumsy for such delicate work. One particularly frustrating night, James held a train car that had just split apart again in his hands. I'm not good at this at all," he whispered to himself in the quiet gouge. He felt like giving up and telling Emma that her train could never be fixed. But then James would think about Emma's grandfather William, who had been such a skilled craftsman. He would remember how proud the old man had been when he first showed them the beautiful train he had made. James would remember Emma's laughter when she played with the train, and how her whole face would light up with happiness. So James kept trying, night after night, determined to learn this new skill for his daughter's sake. 3 long weeks had passed since James started working on Emma's broken train set in the cold gouge every single night. He had tried his best to glue the pieces back together and make them look like they did before. But no matter how hard James tried, something always seemed to go wrong with his repairs. Some nights, the wood glue would not dry the way it was supposed to. James would carefully hold 2 pieces together for many minutes, thinking they were stuck tight. But when he let go, the pieces would fall apart again or dry in a crooked way that looked all wrong. Other nights, when James tried to paint over the glued areas to make them match the original colors, his paintbrush would leave ugly smudges and streaks. His big rough fingers could not control the tiny brush the way someone with gentle hands might. The worst nights were when James would pick up a piece that he thought was finally fixed, only to have it break apart again in his tired hands. After working 10 hours at the construction site, lifting heavy concrete blocks and steel beams, James's hands would shake from exhaustion. Sometimes he would accidentally squeeze a delicate train piece too hard and hear the terrible sound of wood cracking once more. At his job during the day, James's supervisor Tom began to notice that something was wrong. Tom had worked with James for many years and had never seen him look so tired and worn out. During their lunch break, when the 2 men sat on wooden crates eating their sandwiches, Tom looked closely at James's face. "You all right, mate?" Tom asked, with genuine concern in his voice. "You look like you have not slept properly in weeks. Your eyes are all red and you keep yawning during work time." James looked up from his simple lunch of bread and cheap lunch meat. For just a moment, he wanted to tell Tom everything. He wanted to explain about Emma's broken train and how he was trying so hard to fix it but failing. Every single night, he wanted to ask Tom if he knew anyone who was good at working with wood who might be able to help them. But James had always been the kind of man who believed he should solve his own problems without asking other people for help. Even as a young boy, James had learned to figure things out by himself when his own father was too busy or too tired to teach him. This habit of solving problems alone had become so strong that James found it very hard to ask for help even when he really needed it. Just tired from working hard, James said simply, not looking Tom in the eyes. He took another bite of his sandwich and changed the subject to talk about their work schedule for a th. Afternoon. While James struggled in the gouge every night, Emma was having her own difficult time. At school, the children who had been mean to her before continued to say unkind things about her old clothes and worn-out shoes. They would whisper and point when she walked by in the hallways. During recess time, they would not let her join their games, leaving Emma to sit alone on a bench and watch the other children play. At home, Emma missed her special wooden train more than ever. She would sometimes take out her other toys and try to play with them, but nothing felt the same as the train that her grandfather had made with so much love. Her dolls seemed boring, and her coloring books could not hold her attention for very long. Emma would often just sit quietly in her room, staring out the window and thinking about happier times when Grandpa William was still alive and her mother still lived with them. One evening, while James was getting ready to go out to the garage for another night of trying to fix the train, the telephone rang in their small kitchen. Emma answered it with a quiet hello, and James could hear that it was Emma's grandmother on the other end of the line. "How are you doing, my dear child?" Grandma's warm voice came through the phone. She tried to call Emma at least once a week to check on how she and James were managing on their own. Emma's voice sounded very quiet and sad when she answered. "I am okay, Grandma. I am doing fine at school and Dad takes good care of me." Then Emma was quiet for a few seconds before she said something that made James's heart feel heavy with worry. "But Grandma," Emma continued in an even quieter voice, "sometimes when things get broken, they just cannot be fixed, can they? Sometimes broken things have to stay broken forever." From where he stood in the kitchen doorway, James heard every word of this conversation. He knew that Emma was not just talking about her wooden train anymore. She was talking about so many other broken things in their life. She was talking about how their family had been broken when her mother decided to leave them too. Years ago, she was talking about how Emma herself felt broken by the mean children at school and by all the sadness that seemed to fill their small house. That night, James worked in the gouge longer than he had ever worked before. His back ached terribly from bending over the tiny train pieces for hours. His eyes burned and watered from staring so hard at the detailed work. His fingers were stained with different colors of paint and covered with small cuts from handling the rough edges of broken wood. It was a cold Thursday night in late winter, and James was sitting in the garage working on the very last train car that needed to be painted, after many weeks of practice. His large rough hands had become much steadier and more careful. He could now hold the tiny paintbrush without shaking, and he had learned how to make smooth, even strokes across the small wooden surfaces. The train set was finally starting to look like something that might actually work again. It was certainly not perfect like it had been when Grandpa William first made it with his skilled craftsman hands, but James could see that all the broken pieces were now connected back together. And most of the train cars had been painted to look somewhat close to their original bright colors. James was concentrating very hard on painting a thin yellow stripe along the side of the last train car when he heard a soft creaking sound behind the old wooden garage door was slowly opening, letting cold night air drift into the small workspace. "Dad," came Emma's small, sleepy voice from the doorway. "Dad, are you out here? James was so surprised to hear Emma's voice that he nearly dropped his paintbrush. He turned round quickly and saw his daughter standing in the garage doorway wearing her warm pink pajamas and fuzzy slippers. She was rubbing her tired eyes with her small fists, and her brown hair was messy from sleeping. James's heart started beating very fast. He had wanted to keep the train repair a complete secret until it was totally finished and perfect. He had planned to surprise Emma on a special day, maybe her birthday or Christmas, by presenting the restored train as a wonderful gift, moving as quickly as he could. James grabbed the old towel that he always kept nearby and threw it over the train, sat on his workbench. But he was not fast enough. Emma had already seen the familiar shape of her beloved wooden train sitting there. Is that my train?" Emma whispered in amazement. Taking small steps closer to the workbench, "The train that Grandpa William made for me." James felt his face become hot and red with embarrassment. He had been caught before he was ready, and he was worried that Emma would be disappointed with his amateur repair work. "Emma, yes, love. Yes, it is your train. I have been trying to fix it for you," he said, his voice shaking a little. With nervousness, Emma walked very slowly toward the workbench where her father was sitting. Even though the train was now covered with the old towel, she could still see its outline and shape underneath. She could tell that it was much bigger than the pile of broken pieces it had been just a few weeks ago. "You have been working on my train all this time?" Emma asked, her voice full of wonder. "All these weeks when I thought you were just fixing your work tools. Is this why you have been so tired every day?" James nodded his head slowly, still feeling embarrassed about being discovered. "I know I am not very good at this kind of delicate work," he said, looking down at his paint-stained hands. "The train is not going to look exactly like it did when your grandfather first made it. The paint colors do not match perfectly, and some of the places where I glued pieces back together look a bit rough and crooked. But I thought that maybe—" "Can I please see it?" Emma interrupted in a soft, gentle voice. "Please. Dad, I want to see what you have been working on." James felt very nervous. But he could not say no to his daughter. With hands that were shaking slightly, he slowly pulled the old towel away from the train set. There on the wooden workbench sat Emma's train, clearly repaired but far from perfect. Anyone could easily see the places where James had glued broken pieces back together because the wood glue had dried invisible lines. The new paint that James had carefully applied was close to the original bright colors that Grandpa William had used, but it was not exactly the same shade. Some parts of the train looked slightly crooked or uneven compared to the perfect craftsmanship that Grandpa William had achieved. But when Emma saw her restored train, her eyes immediately filled up with tears. These were not tears of sadness like the ones she had cried on the day the train broke. These were tears of pure joy and amazement. "Dad, it is so beautiful," Emma said in a voice that was barely louder than a whisper. "You really did all of this work just for me. I wanted you to have your special train back," James said quietly, still worried that his repair work was not good enough. "I know it is not as perfect as when your grandpa made it, but I hope that maybe you could still—" Before James could finish his sentence, Emma threw her small arms round her father's waist and hugged him as tightly as she could. "It is even more beautiful now than it was before," she said, her voice muffled because her face was pressed against her father's workshirt. "Because now it has your love inside it too. Along with Grandpa's love." From that special night forward, Emma began joining her father in the garage every evening. 2 weeks after Emma had discovered her father working on the train in the garage, her 10th birthday finally arrived. James had been planning this special day for weeks. even though he knew it would have to be a very simple celebration. There was no extra money in their small budget for a big birthday party with lots of decorations and expensive presents like some other children might have. But James had managed to save just enough money to buy Emma a small chocolate birthday cake from the discount bakery down the street. The cake was not fancy or decorated with colorful flowers, but it was chocolate, which was Emma's favorite flavor. James had also bought a small package of birthday candles to make the celebration feel more special. On the evening of Emma's birthday, she sat at their little wooden kitchen table trying her best to look happy and excited about the simple celebration. The kitchen was lit only by the warm glow of the birthday candles on her cake, which made everything feel cozy and peaceful. Emma had invited her grandmother to join them for dinner and cake, and the three generations sat together round the small table. Emma's grandmother had brought a small wrapped present, which turned out to be a warm wear-upon scarf that she had made herself during the long winter evenings. Emma hugged her grandmother and thanked her for the beautiful gift, but James could tell that his daughter was still thinking about something else. He could see in her eyes that she was remembering other birthdays when her mother had been there, and when her grandfather William had been alive to celebrate with them. After they finished eating their pieces of chocolate cake and Emma had blown out all 10 of her birthday candles, James pushed back his chair and stood up from the table. His hands were shaking slightly with nervousness, and his heart was beating faster than usual. "I have something special for you too, love," James said, his voice trembling just a little bit. "It is not something new from a store, and it is certainly not perfect like store-bought gifts might be, but it was made with all the love in my heart." James walked to the kitchen counter where he had hidden Emma's special birthday present under a clean dish towel. Very carefully, he lifted the towel and picked up the wooden train set, which was now sitting on a small wooden base that James had also built himself during his evenings in the garage. When Emma saw her restored train set, she gasped so loudly that her grandmother jumped in surprise. Emma quickly covered her mouth with both of her small hands, and her eyes grew wide with amazement and joy. The wooden train was absolutely beautiful, but it was beautiful in a completely different way than it had been when Grandfather William first made it. You could see every single place where James had carefully glued broken pieces back together. The paint colors were close to the original bright reds, blues, yellows, and greens, but they had subtle differences that showed where James had mixed new paint to match the old colors as best as he could. Some of the joints where pieces had been reconnected showed tiny thin lines of dried wood glue. The wheels on some of the train cars did not line up exactly straight like they had when Grandfather William's expert hands had first attached them. There were small imperfections everywhere that told the story of an amateur craftsman learning a new skill through love and determination. But somehow, all of these small imperfections did not make the train look damaged or ugly. Instead, they told a beautiful story of love, dedication, and hope. They showed how much James cared about his daughter and how far he was willing to go to make her happy. "Oh, Dad," Emma whispered, and tears of pure happiness began rolling down her cheeks. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen in my whole life." Emma stood up from her chair and walked slowly toward her father and the restored train. With gentle fingertips, she touched every repaired section, every new brushstroke of paint, and every sign of her father's hard work and dedication. She traced the lines where pieces had been glued back together, and she examined the places where new paint covered old scratches. "I can see exactly how much you love me in every single piece of this train," Emma said, her voice full of wonder and gratitude. "Every repair shows me how much you care." James felt his own eyes filling with tears as he watched his daughter's reaction to his amateur repair work. "I was so worried and scared that it would not be good enough for you," He admitted, "I am not skilled at this kind of delicate work like your grandfather was." Emma carefully picked up the train set and hugged it gently against her chest, being very careful not to damage any of James's repairs. "It is absolutely perfect because you made it with love," she said, looking directly into her father's eyes. "Just like our family, Dad. We might be a little bit broken sometimes, but we are perfect because we love each other so much." That afternoon, Emma and James sat together on the soft carpet in their living room, exactly the same way Emma used to sit with her grandfather William on Sunday afternoons. They built long winding tracks using books and pillows to create hills and bridges. Then they pushed the little wooden train along the tracks and made up wonderful new stories about all the magical places it would visit. The end.